A police officer were patrolling the snowy outskirts of town when he spotted something unusual. Two figures curled together near a frost-covered bench. One was a child. The other was a retired police dog. The girl whispered, barely audible over the wind, "Please, don't take him. He's all I have left." That moment shattered the silence and everything Luke Carson thought he knew about loss, loyalty, and love. What happened next will break your heart and stitch it back together with hope. Before we begin, tell me, do you believe that dogs can sense more than we ever could? Drop a comment below and share your story. And if your heart beats for the forgotten, the lost, and those who still believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button. Because this story might just change how you see family, forever. Alder Creek was the kind of town people passed through without knowing its name. Nestled in the shadows of the Cascade Mountains, it lay frozen under a late-winter siege-gray skies, biting winds and snow thick enough to erase roads and memories alike. The storm had dragged on for 3 straight days, and even now, as the wind howled like a starving beast, visibility barely stretched past the tree line. Most folks had retreated indoors, shuttering windows and hoping the power lines would hold, but duty didn't bend to weather. Officer Luke Carson, 38, trudged through the knee-deep snow along the edge of the old quarry trail with his flashlight slicing the dusk in narrow arcs. A former state trooper turned small-town officer, Luke was broad-shouldered, square-jawed, and carried himself with the quiet composure of someone who had seen too much but still refused to look away. His hair was a sandy brown, kept short beneath his wool-lined patrol cap, and his eyes, a weary steel blue, constantly scanned his surroundings with precision that had made him one of the best on the force. Luke had only been in Alder Creek for 7 months, transferring after a fatal pursuit incident that left one of his rookie partners dead. Since then, he preferred the silence, the cold, and the uncomplicated peace of a snow-covered town where nothing ever really happened. Until now. He was about to turn back toward the cruiser when he saw it, a stillness too perfect to be natural. Near a public bench, half swallowed by snow, were 2 figures. A child-sized silhouette slumped over something else. Luke's instincts surged. He moved fast. "Hello?" he called out, lowering his voice to soften the alarm. "Are you okay?" No answer, just the wind. He approached slowly, boots crunching snow. The smaller figure was a little girl, no older than 6. She wore a torn red sweater over a flimsy white dress, and her small legs were bare. Her cheeks were flushed raw from the cold, her lips cracked. Her arms were wrapped around the neck of a large German shepherd who lay pressed against her side like a furry furnace. "Jesus," Luke muttered. He dropped to one knee. "Sweetheart?" The girl stirred, eyelids fluttering. Her voice came in a whisper so faint he nearly missed it. "Don't take Scout. Daddy said he'd come back." Luke froze. Scout. There was only one Scout in Alder Creek, and only one man that dog belonged to. Cole, Luke said under his breath. Sheriff Cole Matthews had been missing for 3 days. The last anyone heard, he'd gone to investigate a lead alone, a decision completely unlike him. No one had expected him to vanish. Rumors whispered everything from foul play to desertion, but no one expected this. Luke removed his parka and wrapped it around the girl with practiced care. She didn't resist, but her arms refused to unlock from the dog. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not taking him. I'm here to help both of you." The dog scout looked up with alert eyes. He was a 5-year-old German shepherd, black and sable-coated, muscular but lean, trained for canine duty since he was a pup. His left foreleg bore a faint scar from a meth lab raid the year prior. Though clearly exhausted, Scout's ears were erect, nose twitching, eyes locked on Luke's every movement. "Good boy," Luke said, extending his gloved hand for the dog to sniff. Scout didn't growl. He just watched, quietly assessing, then slowly shifted to give Luke better access to the girl. "Let's get out of this cold." Luke scooped the girl into his arms. She couldn't have weighed more than 35 pounds. Her body was limp with fatigue, but she didn't release Scout's collar. So Scout followed, one slow step at a time. There was no way he'd get them to the station in this storm. The back roads were all but buried. Instead, Luke made the call only he could. He turned toward his hunting cabin, just a 15-minute hike through the woods. He hadn't used it in weeks, but it was stocked, had heat, and most importantly was safe. The journey was brutal. Snow clung to every crevice, and the girl moaned softly as the cold worked through the layers Luke had wrapped around her. But he didn't stop. Not once. Scout stayed close, his body brushing Luke's side occasionally, as if silently encouraging him forward. Inside the cabin, Luke kicked the door open with his boot, shouldered it shut again, and rushed to stoke the fireplace. He set the girl down on a cot near the hearth, laying extra blankets over her tiny frame. Her hands still gripped Scout's fur. "What's your name?" he asked quietly as he lit a kerosene lamp. She blinked slowly. Her lips trembled, but not from cold, from fear. "Eliza," she finally murmured. It was her. Eliza Matthews. Luke stepped back, chest tight. He watched Scout hop lightly onto the cot beside her, curling his body protectively around her. She snuggled into the dog's warmth like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. He grabbed his radio, nothing but static. Of course. The storm hadn't lifted. Luke stood near the window, watching snow whip past in crooked gusts, and felt the quiet dread settle into his bones. Sheriff Matthews was missing. His daughter had just been found, half frozen, clutching a canine as if her life depended on it. And she'd said, "Daddy said he'd come back." But Cole hadn't. And somewhere out there in the storm, maybe he still couldn't. Morning came quietly to the woods surrounding Luke Carson's cabin. Snow still clung to the bare branches like stubborn ghosts, and the sky remained a washed-out gray that gave no hint of warmth. Inside the one-room cabin, the fire had burned low but not out, casting a flickering orange across the worn pine walls. Luke stood at the window, mug of instant coffee in hand, watching Scout pace the edge of the room for the third time since sunrise. Scout's gait was steady but alert, his paws silent on the wooden floor. His thick black and sable coat bristled each time a gust of wind brushed past the cabin walls. Every creak, every sound outside made his ears twitch. At 6 years old, Scout was still as sharp as any active-duty canine. Years of tactical training had forged an instinct Luke trusted. Right now, that instinct was screaming. Behind him, a soft rustle. Eliza stirred on the cot, still wrapped in the wool blankets Luke had laid over her. Her small frame was curled inward, hands clutching the straps of a faded pink backpack as though someone might try to steal it. Her face was calmer than last night, no longer flushed with cold, but there was no peace in her sleep. Only tension, as if she'd learned not to trust the quiet. Luke crouched beside the wood stove and fed it another log, careful not to wake her. When the girl finally sat up, blinking slowly at the unfamiliar surroundings, Scout was already beside her, resting his muzzle gently on the cot's edge. She didn't speak, just reached out and buried her fingers in the fur at his neck. Luke approached cautiously. "Good morning, Eliza. You're safe now, okay? This is my cabin." She looked up, her eyes glassy. "You're Officer Carson." Her voice was raspy but clear. He gave a gentle nod. "You remember me?" "My daddy had your picture in his office." Her tone didn't carry accusation or trust. It was simply a fact. Luke lowered himself into the nearby chair. "I've been trying to find him. So has the whole department." At that, her gaze dropped. She didn't speak again. Not about her father, not about where she'd been, just tightened her grip on Scout. Luke didn't push. Instead, he stood and walked over to the shelf where his portable radio sat. He turned the dial, searching for a signal. Static. He stepped outside onto the snow-dusted porch and extended the antenna. After a few tries, a faint connection sparked to life. "This is Officer Luke Carson, ID 3877. I have Eliza Matthews in my care. Repeat, Eliza Matthews is safe." The voice on the other end was Deputy Heron, a young but reliable officer back at the county's emergency dispatch. "Copy that, Officer Carson. Sheriff Matthews still MIA. Weather's made search ops near impossible. Any word from the girl? Not yet, Luke replied, but there's something odd here. He glanced inside at Scout, who had left Eliza's side and was now staring at the window again, tail stiff. Back inside, Eliza sat cross-legged on the cot, pink backpack still in her lap. Luke hesitated, then knelt in front of her. Eliza, is it okay if I look inside your bag? Just to make sure there's nothing dangerous, and maybe it'll help us find your dad. She looked hesitant, but then gave a small nod. Just be careful. Luke unzipped the faded canvas bag. Inside were a few small things, a crumpled granola bar, a cracked plastic comb, a tiny flashlight with half-dead batteries. Then a folded piece of drawing paper caught his eye. He gently pulled it free. The drawing was crude but unmistakable. A small cabin with a crooked chimney, surrounded by trees. There was a stream drawn in blue crayon, and what looked like a man, a child, and a dog. The man had no face. Luke frowned. Did you draw this? Eliza nodded. Is this the place where you were? She shook her head slowly. No, it's where Daddy told me to go if something bad happened. He said Scout would remember the way. Luke looked to the dog. Scout sat by the door, ears rigid, eyes tracking something outside. Then, from the distance, a low rumble. A car engine. Scout growled low in his throat. Not loud, but sharp-targeted. Luke moved to the window and saw a dark SUV passing slowly along the forest road about 40 yards downhill. Unmarked, tinted windows. It didn't stop, but Scout's behavior was unmistakable. He recognized the sound. Luke grabbed his jacket, stepped outside, and watched the taillights disappear down the snowy path. He memorized the tire tread pattern as best he could. Aggressive, thick, off-road tires, probably a private vehicle. He doubted it was search and rescue. Back inside, he turned to find Scout standing in front of Eliza, blocking her from view. Luke crouched down. It's okay, boy. They're gone. Scout didn't budge until Luke returned to his seat. After lunch instant soup and crackers, Luke retrieved a duffel from under the cot. Inside were motion-triggered trail cameras and batteries he used during hunting season. If someone knew Eliza was here, they might come back. He spent the next half hour placing cameras at 4 key points: front path, west woods, the ridge trail, and the back edge near the creek. All were low profile, camouflaged, and silent. When he returned, the fire had been stoked again. Eliza was sitting on the floor with Scout, drawing in a notebook that had clearly seen better days. Luke settled beside her and peeked over her shoulder. She was drawing a man again, but this time his face was shaded black. Luke didn't comment. Instead, he asked, "Do you know who that is?" She shrugged. "He smells like gasoline. Daddy said he wasn't real police." Luke's mind sharpened. That was new, a man with a scent, an imposter. Eliza. "Did your dad say anything else about that man?" She hesitated. Then, "He said if anything happened, go with Scout. Don't talk to anyone unless Scout let me." Luke looked at the dog, now watching both of them. The connection between girl and dog was uncanny, like Scout had been guarding her heart as well as her body. The rest of the afternoon passed in heavy quiet. Luke noted that every time the wind shifted or a bird squawked nearby, Scout moved to a window, and each time, Eliza followed his lead without question. There was something more than training at work here. It was as if they shared a silent code. By nightfall, Luke finally allowed himself a moment to sit down and think. He scribbled in his own notebook notes, observations, tire tracks, the smell of fuel, the drawing of the cabin. Eliza slept early, curled beside Scout on the cot, her arm draped over his back, and for the first time since she arrived, her face looked peaceful. Luke stood at the window again, looking out into the white silence. Whatever had happened, it was far from over, but at least now, she wasn't alone. The snow had softened overnight, blanketing the forest around the cabin in a deceptively peaceful hush. Sunlight filtered through breaks in the clouds, casting a faint silver glow over the trees and turning the icy crust on the ground into glittering shards. But beneath that beauty, the woods held their secrets, and Scout was determined to uncover them. Luke Carson laced his boots in silence, glancing over at Scout, who stood by the door, posture tense, tail rigid. The German shepherd had been restless all morning, pacing between windows, occasionally letting out a short, sharp huff that meant one thing: it was time to move. Luke didn't need convincing. Something about last night's SUV and Eliza's whispered fear of the man who smelled like gasoline was clawing at the back of his mind. He stepped outside, rifle slung across his back, a sidearm at his hip, not expecting trouble but no longer ruling it out. Scout followed immediately, nose low, ears flicking as he caught a scent. Eliza watched from the cabin window, her face pale and expression unreadable. She hadn't said much since yesterday's drawing, but Luke hadn't missed the way she murmured in her sleep the night before, her tiny voice laced with fear. "Daddy said, don't trust the ones with fake name tags." The words had sent a cold ripple down his spine. They moved downhill through thick snowdrifts, Scout leading with steady, deliberate steps. Luke had hunted these woods before, but now every branch felt like it hid eyes behind it. They reached the edge of the frozen lake within 20 minutes. The surface was pale and cracked in spots, layered with wind-scattered snow. Scout slowed, nose twitching. Then he stopped near a cluster of fallen logs and began pawing at the snow. Luke knelt beside him and brushed the area clean. Beneath the frost was a patch of disturbed earth like someone had dug or knelt here. Scout let out a low growl and moved a few steps forward toward the tree line. Luke followed, eyes narrowing. There, just beyond a thick drift, were tire tracks, fresh enough to cut through the outer crust of snow, wide-treaded and deep. Not more than 24 hours old. Scout barked once short, clipped, and darted ahead. Luke followed, adrenaline rising. About 30 yards into the woods, Scout stopped again, nose pressed to the base of a crooked pine. Luke approached slowly. Beneath the tree's bent branches lay a patch of dark, ice-frozen blood. Small droplets, but unmistakable. He scanned the area and spotted a second splash pattern further back, as if someone had staggered or been dragged. Then Scout's body stiffened, ears pinned forward. He darted into a thick bramble and began digging furiously. Luke pushed through behind him and saw something half buried beneath the snow, a small metal object darkened by rust and stained red. A button. Luke picked it up carefully, turning it over. It was brass, military style, embossed with a faded insignia. There was blood on the inner edge. His mind raced. This wasn't just random. Someone had bled here. Someone had fought. Scout stared up at him, eyes sharp. Luke rubbed his jaw. He remembered Cole's words from the last internal report he'd read about someone Cole had been looking into. A former National Guard mechanic named Daniel Voss, early 40s, dishonorably discharged for assault, rumored to be running with local militias, but always just out of reach. Cole had suspected him of posing as law enforcement to access vulnerable families. Luke pulled out his phone and scrolled through his offline case files. Sure enough, Voss had been flagged in one of Cole's last notes, handwritten on the side of a printed map. Voss, Eeks, threat. Gasoline, tag swap. Luke exhaled slowly, slipping the button into a Ziploc bag. He needed to get this into evidence, but more than that, he needed to find out where Voss had gone. They circled the lake one more time. Scout sniffed every tree, every patch of disturbed snow, but no more blood. No prints. Whatever had happened, it ended here, or was moved elsewhere. As they made their way back to the cabin, Scout paused several times to look back, ears alert, nose high. He wasn't just following a trail anymore, he was tracking the past. Back at the cabin, Luke stomped the snow off his boots and walked in, shaking frost from his jacket. Eliza was still sitting near the fire, hugging Scout's pink backpack. Her eyes met his briefly, then dropped. But something in her had shifted. She seemed to be waiting for his report. "We found something," he said gently. "A button. From someone your dad was investigating." She didn't speak, but her hands tightened on the bag. Luke warmed his fingers near the stove. "Do you remember anything else? About the man you saw?" She hesitated, then whispered, "He called Daddy Sarge, but he wasn't a soldier." Luke's eyes narrowed. "Do you remember what he looked like?" "Beard, black coat, eyes like—" She paused, struggling for the word. "Like fire, but dead." It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Luke's gut clench. Voss matched that description. That night, as Eliza slept, twisting once more in a dream-laced sleep, Scout curled protectively at her side. Each time she whimpered, Scout nudged her gently with his nose. Luke watched from the shadows, arms crossed, mind racing. In the silence of the cabin, the weight of the forest pressed in from all sides. But they weren't entirely alone now. There were tracks in the snow, and Luke intended to follow them all. The storm had eased, but the silence it left behind was unnerving, a kind of hush that pressed against the ears and made every broken twig sound like a gunshot. Luke Carson moved carefully along the narrow deer trail that wound beneath the overhang of a rocky ravine. The snow was deeper here, more untouched, like this stretch of land had been forgotten by time. Scout trotted ahead, weaving between tree trunks with calculated grace, his tail low and eyes sharp. Luke's breath came in clouds as he climbed down the incline. It had been nearly 2 hours since Scout began acting strange, circling the door of the cabin back home, whining and scratching until Eliza, with trembling lips, whispered, "He wants you to follow him. Daddy taught him how to track when I can't." Her voice was soft but certain. They had left Eliza with a portable heater, extra blankets, and the emergency walkie. She'd nodded solemnly when he asked if she'd be all right, then curled up with a book from the shelf and a promise. "Scout will bring you back." Now, as the trail narrowed between jutting stones and frostbitten pine, Scout suddenly stopped. His body went still, front paw raised. Luke followed his gaze. Tucked beneath the slope was a cabin, half swallowed by earth and time. The roof was low and slanted, covered in a thatch of dead limbs and snow. A chimney belched a lazy line of smoke into the cold sky. Someone had been there recently. Luke crouched low, eyes sweeping the perimeter. The door hung slightly ajar. No lights, no sound. Scout crept forward and stopped near the porch, ears twitching. Then he circled the far side, sniffing the snow. Luke followed, weapon drawn, boots crunching softly. The inside of the cabin was sparse but lived in. A cot in the corner, a crate of canned goods, ash in the fireplace, still warm. Whoever had been here had left in a hurry. Half a thermos of coffee still steamed on the windowsill, and a jacket lay tossed over the arm of a chair. Scout's attention snapped toward a corner where a heavy tarp covered the floor. He growled low, then began pawing at the wood underneath. Luke moved quickly, pulling the tarp aside. Underneath was a broken handheld radio military issue. The casing was cracked, wires exposed. Luke picked it up gently, thumbed the power switch. It hissed static, then clicked into a recorded message. "Matthews, do not leave. Repeat, stay under until further." The recording ended in garbled static. Luke's jaw tightened. That was Cole's name. Someone had been communicating with him, or about him. The voice on the radio wasn't familiar. It wasn't Cole. He turned toward Scout, who was now nosing at a rolled-up piece of canvas tucked beneath the cot. Luke tugged it free. It unfolded into a torn, partially burned map. Most of it was indecipherable, but one section had been circled in red ink. Site B, it read. Nothing else. No town name, no roads, just the circle and a line leading into it from the north. Luke folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat. He turned to examine the fireplace and found boot prints in the soot near the hearth one set. The tracks led out the back, into the thickets. Whoever had been here was traveling light. No sign of a struggle, but someone had left fast and quiet. A sudden memory surfaced Eliza. Last night, half asleep, whispering, "They keep Daddy in a place that smells like bleach and cement. That's what he said before they took him." Luke felt his stomach twist. This cabin was old wood and mold. Whatever Eliza described wasn't here, but this was a waypoint, a rest stop. Whoever had been hiding here had something to do with Cole in Site B might be where he was now. Luke tapped his earpiece. No signal, of course. Not this deep. Back at the cabin, Luke later sent encrypted photos of the map and the radio casing via satellite burst to the only person he trusted outside the local station. Nora Eames, an FBI field agent stationed in Billings. A woman in her early 40s with a mind like a steel trap and a voice that could command silence in any room. She had worked with Cole once, during a multi-state trafficking case 2 years ago. Tall, lean, always dressed in black tactical slacks and a wool coat she never seemed to feel cold in. Her no-nonsense approach had made her unpopular with local law enforcement, but Cole had admired her deeply. Luke included a single line with the message, "Matthews may be alive. Need you." Scout barked twice from outside, urging him to keep moving. They were halfway up the ravine when they saw movement ahead. Just a deer, bounding through the trees, but Luke didn't relax. This part of the woods had shifted. The air felt watched. When they returned to the main trail, the sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows. Luke felt the weight of the map in his pocket and the heavier weight of decisions yet to come. Back at the cabin, Eliza had fallen asleep on the floor, Scout's pink backpack tucked beneath her head. Her face was relaxed, finally. Beside her lay a notebook, opened to a new drawing. This one was different. It showed a building concrete walls, no windows, and smoke rising from behind it. Luke stared at it for a long time, then walked over to the map again, now laid flat on the table beneath a lamplight. "Site B," he murmured. "We're coming." The sky over Alder Creek had turned a muted silver, the kind of late winter light that made even the pines look ghostly. The snow had hardened underfoot, crunching louder than usual as Luke Carson carried firewood across the front yard of the cabin. The air was colder today, but not the kind of cold that bit it hovered instead, like a warning held just beneath the skin. Inside, Eliza was combing Scout's fur with a small wooden brush Luke had found in a drawer. Her fingers moved with surprising care for a child so small, and Scout, usually wary with touch, sat patiently, occasionally turning his head to check her face. The connection between the two had deepened. Luke had noticed it more with each day. He dropped the firewood into the rack beside the stove, wiped his hands on his jeans, and was about to return to the door when he heard the sound-crunching boots. Not Scout, not his own. He reached for the rifle resting near the kitchen counter just as a knock came. Firm. 3 taps. No hesitation. Luke opened the door halfway, the safety already disengaged. The man standing on the other side wore a long charcoal coat, zipped to the throat, and a black scarf tucked under the collar. His gloves, black leather, snug to the fingers, were too clean for this weather. He stood tall, mid-40s, lean build, with a chiseled face that might have once passed for charming but had since been dulled by something colder. His skin was pale and taut, hair dark and slicked back under a wool hat. His eyes, a glassy gray, didn't blink enough. "Afternoon," the man said smoothly, voice low and practiced. "I'm looking for my niece, Eliza Matthews." Luke didn't answer at first. His stance remained steady, not lowering the rifle. "You're her what?" "Uncle," the man repeated, pulling a business card from his coat pocket and extending it. "Family liaison. I've been working with Child Services. Name's James Holloway. Her case is sensitive, I'm sure you understand." Luke took the card but didn't look at it yet. "You got ID?" The man's smile thinned. "Course, just not on me. Roads were bad, got here as fast as I could when I heard she'd been found. Her father, Sheriff Matthews, was a dear friend. We go back years." From inside the cabin, Scout's growl rumbled like a low engine. Luke turned his head just enough to see the dog now standing at the doorway, teeth bared, hackles rising. The growl grew louder when Eliza appeared behind him, eyes wide, voice cracking. "That's him," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "That's the man who took Daddy." Luke's stomach dropped. He stepped fully into the doorway, body blocking the entrance. "You should leave." James Holloway, if that was even his name, raised both hands. "I understand you're protective, but refusing to hand over a child to a registered guardian can be problematic. Not half as problematic as lying to a law enforcement officer during an open investigation," Luke said coldly. "Now get off my property." Holloway's expression barely changed. He offered a slight nod, slipped a second card into the doorframe, then turned and walked calmly back toward the road, boots crunching without urgency. Scout followed him to the edge of the porch, watching, growl never fading. When the man disappeared behind the trees, Scout finally stopped. But his tail remained low, his body tight. Luke shut the door and locked both bolts. Eliza ran to Scout, wrapping her arms around his neck. "He took Daddy. I remember now. He had a badge, but Scout growled then too. Daddy told me to run, and Scout stayed behind. He didn't come back that night." Luke said nothing. He picked up the card Holloway left in the doorframe. The paper was thick, embossed with a fake agency name, Montana Child Welfare Recovery Program. There was a phone number and address, neither of which Luke trusted. He reached for his phone and called Nora Eames. Nora answered on the second ring, voice brisk as ever. "Carson, I just finished digging into the audio you sent. That voice doesn't belong to anyone listed on official rescue teams." "I've got more," Luke said. "Guy came to the cabin just now, claimed to be Eliza's uncle, no ID, called himself James Holloway, left a card fake agency." "Hold on," she said. Typing clicked rapidly on the other end. "Holloway's one of the aliases linked to a man named Caleb Dorn, former intelligence contractor. Went off-grid 4 years ago. Last ping we had, he was tied to a private security firm accused of snatching at-risk children for black market placements. No convictions. Slippery. Eliza said he's the one who took Cole." "Then we're closer than we thought," Nora said. "Watch your 6. He's always got backup." That night, after Eliza had gone to bed, Scout began pacing. Not just around the room, but in tight circles around Luke's jacket, which hung on a chair near the window. Luke watched him for a while, frowning. Then he moved to inspect the coat. Scout sniffed along the hem, then stopped abruptly. He began pawing at the inner lining. Luke reached inside and froze. Tucked just behind the stitched tag was a black plastic disc, no larger than a quarter, a tracking beacon. Luke pulled it free and turned it over. No markings. Lightweight, professional grade. He walked to the wood stove and dropped it into the fire. Scout sat beside him, watching the flames. Neither of them moved until the disc cracked under the heat and burst into two. The wind cut sharper at this elevation, whipping flakes of hard snow across the cracked concrete ruins like glass slivers. Site B, as it was once labeled on the burnt map, stood in the clearing like the skeleton of something long buried half factory, half bunker, its steel siding rusted and warped, windows shattered or bricked over. Nature had tried to reclaim it, but the place still held its secrets tight. Luke Carson stood at the tree line, rifle slung tight against his shoulder, eyes fixed on the compound. Beside him crouched Scout, ears up, nose twitching with urgent precision. Behind them, 2 figures from the Rapid Response Unit agent Raul Vega and medic Jenna Toller checked their gear. Both had been flown in from Billings an hour ago after Nora greenlit the emergency op. Vega was a muscular man in his early 40s, Latino, short-cropped black hair dusted with gray. Years of tactical work had carved sharp lines into his face, and his calm, clipped manner made it clear he didn't waste words. He gave Luke a nod. "We go quiet, in and out." Jenna, early 30s, was lean and steady-handed, her dark brown skin flushed from the cold. A no-nonsense trauma medic who once worked with international rescue units, she carried her med bag like it was an extension of her body. Her breath fogged the air as she whispered, "You're sure he's here?" Luke looked down at Scout. The dog had locked onto the scent an hour ago and hadn't deviated since. He hadn't made a sound, but his posture screamed focus. Luke gave one nod. "He's sure." They moved. Scout took point, leading them through a hole in the fence and around the back where snow had piled against a side wall. Luke brushed aside frozen vines to reveal a metal maintenance door, long rusted but still hinged. It took Vega 30 seconds and a silent crowbar to get it open. The interior reeked of mildew, old fuel, and rot. Darkness swallowed the corridor ahead, pierced only by their headlamps. Scout's paws padded silently forward, nose to the ground, tail held straight behind him. He turned left into a hallway that dipped slightly downward toward the substructure. They descended into a concrete labyrinth, old stairwells, shattered lighting, graffiti, broken pallets. The further they went, the colder it got. Scout suddenly stopped, nose raised. A low growl vibrated in his chest. He bolted left into a metal door at the end of a tunnel. The door was thick, steel reinforced, bolted. Scout barked sharply, once, then again. His paws slammed against the door, claws scraping, the sound echoing like a scream through the silence. Luke rushed forward. "Cole," he called. "Sheriff Matthews, can you hear me?" No answer. Scout barked again, louder, more insistent. Then from inside movement, a faint thud, a groan. Vega moved in with bolt cutters, working fast. The lock snapped. Luke threw the door open. The room inside was no bigger than a closet, concrete walls stained with damp, a single bucket in the corner, and on the floor, slumped and unmoving, was Cole Matthews. He looked like a shadow of the man Luke had known. Once a tall, commanding presence with a firm handshake and voice that filled a room, Cole was now gaunt, face hollow, beard uneven and matted. His clothes hung loose, soaked and filthy. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, ankles the same. Scout rushed in and immediately began licking his face, whining low, tail wagging furiously for the first time in days. Cole stirred. His cracked lips moved. "Scout." Luke and Jenna dropped to their knees. Jenna began cutting restraints and checking vitals. Cole's voice was hoarse, weak. "Eliza." "She's safe," Luke said quickly. "She's with me. You're okay now." Cole's head rolled to the side. In his dirt-caked hand was a small photo-creased, water-stained, but still visible. Eliza, smiling, maybe 4 years old, with Scout beside her in full vest. "Don't let them touch her," Cole whispered. "He wants her for leverage." Jenna was already prepping a saline IV, whispering softly, but Cole's hand clung to the photo like it was oxygen. Scout didn't move from his side. He stayed curled against him, licking his cheek, nudging his chin, eyes filled with something unspoken recognition, relief, maybe even guilt. He hadn't been there when Cole was taken, but he'd brought the rescue. He'd found the trail. Vega kept watch at the door, rifle ready. No heat signatures nearby. Looks like they cleared out. Luke crouched beside Cole. "Who was it, Cole? Who took you?" The sheriff blinked slowly, lips dry. "Caleb." "Dorn." Luke felt the name hit like a hammer. "We've had contact. He came for Eliza." Cole tried to sit, failed. "He thinks she's the key. Not sure why. Something about what she saw." Luke nodded, heart racing. They lifted Cole onto a stretcher Jenna unfolded from her pack. Scout trotted beside them all the way out, never once leaving Cole's side. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken again, but Luke felt something lift from his chest for the first time in days. They had found him, alive. Snow had begun to melt in Alder Creek, just enough to expose patches of muddy earth and dead leaves, the bones of winter showing themselves before spring fully returned. But beneath that thawing landscape, something else had come to light, a chain of lies, deceit, and a predator masquerading as a savior. Cole Matthews lay in the recovery wing of Frostford General Hospital, his body wrapped in layers of heated blankets, an IV pumping fluid into his veins. His face was no longer sallow, but still bore the shadows of captivity. Beside him sat Eliza, her tiny hand resting over his, her braid tucked behind one ear. She hadn't left his side for more than a few minutes since his rescue, not even when he'd fallen asleep. Scout lay curled at their feet, his head resting across both pairs of boots like a sentinel. Luke stood at the doorway, arms crossed. Behind him was Nora Eames. Nora, now working the case full-time, had driven through the night from Billings after the extraction from Site B. Tall and stern with sharp green eyes and a streak of gray in her black braid, she wore her badge clipped to the front of her fleece jacket and carried a thick binder under one arm. She was known in the Bureau as the type who didn't flinch, whether it was a bloodied crime scene or a bureaucratic blockade. "We traced the funding stream," she said, voice low but unwavering. "It wasn't just Dorn. There's an entire network posing as child welfare workers using false paperwork to target children of vulnerable families, especially those with single or isolated parents. Cole got too close." Luke nodded slowly. "And Dorn made it personal." Nora sighed. "He always did. But we've got him. The surveillance you planted at the second site, clean audio and visual. Cross-referenced with Eliza's testimony. It's more than enough." Luke glanced at the small girl in the chair, now whispering something to Cole and brushing a lock of hair from his temple. "She's brave," he said quietly. "Smarter than anyone gives her credit for." "Like her dad," Nora replied. The trial was set within 2 weeks. Given the severity of the charges and the public pressure, especially after the photos of Site B and Cole's condition leaked to media outlets, the court moved fast. It was held in Billings District Courthouse, a modern gray stone building flanked by news vans and protesters. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Cole sat in the front row, thinner now, but upright, jaw clenched. Eliza sat beside him, her hands nervously toying with a string bracelet someone had given her. Scout lay on the floor at her side, wearing a new navy blue vest with a bright silver patch. Service K9. Court support approved. The defendant sat across the aisle. Caleb Dorn, now unshaven, eyes sunken, wore an ill-fitting suit that didn't soften the cruel edge of his face. His hands were clasped calmly, too calmly, over his knees. Every so often his gaze flicked to Eliza, not with remorse, but calculation. Judge Catherine Moore presided, an older woman in her 60s, small in frame but notorious for her firm rulings. Her silver hair was tied into a tight knot, and her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose as she reviewed the file. "Let's begin with the testimony of Eliza Matthews," she said, voice steady. Luke escorted Eliza to the witness chair. Her feet dangled above the floor. The courtroom quieted. She looked at the judge, then at Scout, who had padded forward and now sat beside the witness box. Eliza reached down, placed her fingers on his head, and took a breath. "He came to our house," she said softly. "He had a badge. He said he was from the state, but he wasn't. Daddy told me to run if something felt wrong. Scout knew. He growled. Daddy told me to go with Scout and hide, so I did." The judge leaned in. "Do you see the man who came to your house?" Eliza looked across the room and pointed, hand shaking slightly. "That's him." Later, Cole took the stand, voice rough but steady. He spoke of his investigation into Dorn's false IDs, his attempt to notify federal authorities before he disappeared, and what happened in the first 48 hours after his abduction-hooded transport. Chemical exposure, interrogation. "He knew Eliza would be the pressure point," Cole said. "He wanted to use her to force me to erase every file I had, but I didn't break." The prosecution presented photographic evidence from Site B chains, burned files, a database recovered from a laptop showing over 24 falsified custody removals. When the verdict came, there was no delay. Caleb Dorn was convicted on all charges: abduction, unlawful imprisonment, impersonation of federal officers, child endangerment, and conspiracy to traffic minors. The sentence, life without parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Eliza stayed close to Cole's side, one hand on Scout's leash, her eyes wide but calm. Luke stepped in front of them, shielding them from the worst of it, while Nora gave a brief statement to the press. But the moment that would never make it to television happened quietly in a side hallway. Cole knelt in front of Eliza, tears brimming. He took her small hands in his. I'm so sorry, baby girl. I should have protected you better. Eliza shook her head. You did. You told Scout to protect me, and he did. Cole pulled her into an embrace. Then I owe him everything. Scout, standing beside them, wagged his tail once, then rested his head gently on Eliza's shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time. Snow had begun to melt in Alder Creek, just enough to expose patches of muddy earth and dead leaves, the bones of winter showing themselves before spring fully returned. But beneath that thawing landscape something else had come to light, a chain of lies, deceit, and a predator masquerading as a savior. Cole Matthews lay in the recovery wing of Frostford General Hospital, his body wrapped in layers of heated blankets, an IV pumping fluid into his veins. His face was no longer sallow, but still bore the shadows of captivity. Beside him sat Eliza, her tiny hand resting over his, her braid tucked behind one ear. She hadn't left his side for more than a few minutes since his rescue, not even when he'd fallen asleep. Scout lay curled at their feet, his head resting across both pairs of boots like a sentinel. Luke stood at the doorway, arms crossed. Behind him was Nora Eames. Nora, now working the case full-time, had driven through the night from Billings after the extraction from Site B. Tall and stern, with sharp green eyes and a streak of gray in her black braid, she wore her badge clipped to the front of her fleece jacket and carried a thick binder under one arm. She was known in the Bureau as the type who didn't flinch, whether it was a bloodied crime scene or a bureaucratic blockade. "We traced the funding stream," she said, voice low but unwavering. "It wasn't just Dorn. There's an entire network posing as child welfare workers, using false paperwork to target children of vulnerable families, especially those with single or isolated parents." Cole got too close. Luke nodded slowly. "And Dorn made it personal." Nora sighed. "He always did. But we've got him. The surveillance you planted at the second site? Clean audio and visual. Cross-referenced with Eliza's testimony. It's more than enough." Luke glanced at the small girl in the chair, now whispering something to Cole and brushing a lock of hair from his temple. "She's brave," he said quietly. "Smarter than anyone gives her credit for." "Like her dad," Nora replied. The trial was set within 2 weeks. Given the severity of the charges and the public pressure, especially after the photos of Site B and Cole's condition leaked to media outlets, the court moved fast. It was held in Billings District Courthouse, a modern gray stone building flanked by news vans and protesters. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Cole sat in the front row, thinner now, but upright, jaw clenched. Eliza sat beside him, her hands nervously toying with the string bracelet someone had given her. Scout lay on the floor at her side, wearing a new navy blue vest with a bright silver patch. Service K9. Court support approved. The defendant sat across the aisle. Caleb Dorn, now unshaven, eyes sunken, wore an ill-fitting suit that didn't soften the cruel edge of his face. His hands were clasped calmly, too calmly, over his knees. Every so often, his gaze flicked to Eliza, not with remorse, but calculation. Judge Catherine Moore presided, an older woman in her 60s, small in frame but notorious for her firm rulings. Her silver hair was tied into a tight knot, and her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose as she reviewed the file. "Let's begin with the testimony of Eliza Matthews," she said, voice steady. Luke escorted Eliza to the witness chair. Her feet dangled above the floor. The courtroom quieted. She looked at the judge, then at Scout, who had padded forward and now sat beside the witness box. Eliza reached down, placed her fingers on his head, and took a breath. "He came to our house," she said softly. "He had a badge. He said he was from the state, but he wasn't. Daddy told me to run if something felt wrong. Scout knew. He growled. Daddy told me to go with Scout and hide. So I did." The judge leaned in. "Do you see the man who came to your house?" Eliza looked across the room and pointed, hand shaking slightly. "That's him." Later, Cole took the stand, voice rough but steady. He spoke of his investigation into Dorn's false IDs, his attempt to notify federal authorities before he disappeared, and what happened in the first 48 hours after his abduction-hooded transport, chemical exposure, interrogation. He knew Eliza would be the pressure point, Cole said. He wanted to use her to force me to erase every file I had, but I didn't break. The prosecution presented photographic evidence from Site B chains, burned files, a database recovered from a laptop showing over 24 falsified custody removals. When the verdict came, there was no delay. Caleb Dorn was convicted on all charges: abduction, unlawful imprisonment, impersonation of federal officers, child endangerment, and conspiracy to traffic minors. The sentence: life without parole. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Eliza stayed close to Cole's side, one hand on Scout's leash, her eyes wide but calm. Luke stepped in front of them, shielding them from the worst of it, while Nora gave a brief statement to the press. But the moment that would never make it to television happened quietly in a side hallway. Cole knelt in front of Eliza, tears brimming. He took her small hands in his. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I should have protected you better." Eliza shook her head. "You did. You told Scout to protect me. And he did." Cole pulled her into an embrace. "Then I owe him everything." Scout, standing beside them, wagged his tail once, then rested his head gently on Eliza's shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time. Spring in Alder Creek never arrived all at once. It crept in slowly, like someone cautious about overstaying their welcome. The snow didn't vanish. It softened, shrank in patches, revealing damp earth and tiny green shoots that pushed stubbornly through frozen ground. The rivers, once silent and sealed under thick ice, began to murmur again. In a clearing just beyond the woods, where the pines gave way to a slope of rolling hills, stood the Matthews cabin, modest, pine-framed, with a steep roof and a wide porch that now held 2 rocking chairs and a small ceramic pot where Eliza insisted wildflowers would grow. Whether they would or not didn't seem to matter. The intention was enough. Inside, laughter had returned. Cole Matthews moved with the stiffness of a man who had been through something he wouldn't forget, but with the strength of someone determined to live again. He'd grown back some of the weight he'd lost. His skin held color again, and though his eyes still carried a quiet storm, his smile had come back, especially when his daughter was near. Eliza, now 7, had returned to a kind of childhood. Her hair was longer, always braided with mismatched ribbons. She wore wool leggings and bright sweatshirts and often carried a stuffed fox in one arm while Scout followed her like a living shadow. Scout, now officially retired and microchipped under Cole's name, had a new leather collar with a brass tag that read, "Guardian of Eliza." At nearly 6.5 years old, the black and sable German Shepherd had softened just slightly. His movements, once sharp with military efficiency, now flowed with purpose touched by gentleness. He still growled when a stranger came too close to the porch unannounced, but at home he was a silent sentinel, ever watchful. Luke Carson stepped out of his dark blue SUV and crossed the gravel path leading to the cabin, his boots crunching over leftover frost. He wore the new uniform of Deputy Chief Now navy jacket with silver trim, the badge more polished, the shoulders broader with new weight. But he still walked the same way, had slightly bowed, like a man used to listening more than speaking. "Hope I'm not interrupting story hour," Luke said as he stepped through the door. Eliza looked up from the fireside where she sat cross-legged, holding a well-worn children's book. "You're late." Scout wagged his tail twice, then settled again in front of the fire, his head resting against Eliza's knee. "I brought something," Luke said, holding up a thin poster rolled in a protective tube. Eliza perked up. "Is it the flyer?" Luke nodded and passed it to her. She unrolled it carefully. There, in bold, soft colors, was a photo of her and Scout standing in the courthouse hallway. She had one hand on his head, and he was looking up at her. At the top, the words read, "Paw Patrol for Lost Hearts, a community outreach initiative, inspired by courage, loyalty, and hope." Below that, small text, "In honor of Eliza and Scout, the first honorary graduates of the Guardian K-9 recovery program." Cole stepped into the room from the hallway, wearing a flannel shirt and soft expression. He took the poster, framed it, and quietly hung it beside the fireplace. On the mantel above it stood another photo newly printed, placed in a rustic wooden frame. It showed the three of them: Cole with his arm around Eliza, Scout seated in front, alert and proud. At the bottom of the frame, in etched copper, were the words, "We were found in the snow, together." They didn't talk about what had happened anymore, not in detail. But its imprint was everywhere, in the way Cole double-checked the locks at night, in how Eliza never walked alone outside without Scout, in Luke's quiet visits, always arriving before sunset and staying just long enough to sit by the fire. But there was healing here. Eliza, curled beside the dog, continued reading aloud from her book, her voice sweet and animated. Scout listened with the calm of a creature who knew he belonged. Cole poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Luke. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "for a while, I didn't think she'd ever laugh again." Luke nodded, watching the little girl spin a tale about a knight who lost his sword but not his courage. "She got it back," Luke said. "You both did." Cole looked down at the mug, then at Scout. "Not alone. He carried us through." The dog stirred at the sound of his name and looked up, tail thumping once before returning to stillness. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, no longer howling with menace but whispering something softer, something that sounded like peace. Sometimes, God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes, He sends a child with courage, a dog with loyalty, and a man who refuses to give up until love finds its way back home. The story of Eliza, Cole, and Scout is more than a rescue tale. It's a reminder that miracles often come quietly, wrapped in fur, spoken in whispers, or hidden in the snow. In our darkest moments, God is still working through people, through animals, and through the silent strength of those who choose to believe, even when all seems lost. So, if you're going through something today, if the world feels too cold, too silent, remember this: you are not alone. God sees. God sends. And sometimes the miracle you're praying for walks on 4 paws or holds your hand when you're scared. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment, Amen, if you believe that God still works in mysterious and beautiful ways. And if you believe every child and every soul deserves a second chance, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more true stories of love, faith, and redemption. May God bless you, and may your own miracles find you when you least expect them.